This morning I saw the countryside from my window a long time before the sunrise with nothing but the morning star, which looked very big, wrote Van Gogh to his brother Theo, describing his inspiration for one of his best-known paintings, The Starry Night. The window to which he refers to was in St. Paul's Asylum in St. Remy in southern France, where he sought respite from his emotional suffering while continuing to make art. The mid-scale oil-on-canvas painting is dominated by a moon and star-filled night sky. It takes up 3/4 of the picture plane and appears turbulent, even agitated or intensely swirling patterns that seem to roll across the surface like waves. It is packed with bright orbs, including the crescent moon to the far right and Venus, the morning star, to the left of center, surrounded by concentric circles of radiant white and yellow lights. Beneath this excessive sky sits a hushed village of humble houses surrounded by a church whose steeple rises sharply above the undulating blue and black mountains in the background. A cypress tree sits in the foreground of the night scene. Flame-like, it reaches almost to the top edge of the canvas, serving as a visual link between land and sky. Considered symbolically, the cypress could be seen as a bridge between life as represented by the earth and death as represented by the sky. Commonly associated with heaven, cypress were also regarded as trees of the graveyard and mourning. But the sight of the stars always makes me dream, Van Gogh once wrote. Why? I say to myself, should the spots of light of the firmament be less accessible to us than the black spots of the map of France? Just as we take the train to go to the Terrasecon or ruin, we take death to go to a star. The Starry Night is based on Van Gogh's direct observations as well as his imagination, memories, and emotions. The steeple of the church, for example, resembles those commonly in his native Holland, not in France. The whirling forms in the sky are, on the other hand, match published astronomical observations of clouds of dust and gas known as nebulae. At once balanced and expressive, the composition is structured by his ordered application of the cypress, steeple, and central nebulae, which is countless shorted by breaststrokes and thickly applied paint, its surfaces in rolling motion. Such a combination of visual contrast was generated by an artist who found beauty and intense interest in the night, which for him was much more alive and rough-colored than the day. The history of the Mona Lisa is shrouded in mystery. Among the aspects which remain unclear are the exact identity of the sitter, who commissioned the portrait, how long Leonardo worked on the painting, how long he kept it, and how long it came to be in French royal collection. The portrait may have been painted to mark one of two events, either when Francisco de Giosecondo and his wife bought their own house in 1503, or when their second son, Andrea, was born in December 1502 after the death of a daughter in 1499. The delicate dark veil covers Mona Lisa's hair and is sometimes considered a mourning veil. In fact, such veils were commonly worn as a mark of virtue. Her clothing is unremarkable, neither the yellow sleeves of her gown, nor the pleated gown, nor the scarf delicately draped around her shoulders are signs of aristocratic status. The Mona Lisa is the earliest Italian portrait to focus so closely on the sitter in a half-length portrait. The painting is generous enough in its dimensions to include the arms and hands without them touching the frame. The portrait is painted to a realistic scale in the highly structured space where it has fullness of volume and sculpture in the round. The figure is shown in half-length from the head to the waist, sitting in a chair whose arms is resting on balusters. She is resting her left arm on the arm of the chair, which is placed in front of the loggia. Suggested by the parapet behind her and two of the fragmentary columns framing the figure in and forming a window looking over the landscape. The perfection of the new artistic formula explains its immediate influence on Florentine and Lombard art of the early 16th century. Such aspects of the work as the three-quarter view of the figure against the landscape, the architectural setting, and the hands jointed on the foreground were already existent in Flemish portraiture of the second half of the 15th century, particularly in the work of Hans Memling. However, the spatial coherence, the atmospheric illusion, and the momentarily and the monumentally and the sheer equilibrium of the work were all new. In fact, the aspects were also new to Leonardo's work, as none of his earlier portraits displayed such controlled majesty. The Mona Lisa's famous smile represents the sitter in the same way the juniper branches represent Geneva Bensi in the ermine represents Cecilia Gagliarani in their portraits in Washington and Krakow respectively. It is a visual representation of the idea of the happiness suggested by the word Gioconda, in Italian. Leonardo made this notion of happiness the central motif of the portrait. It is the notion in which makes the work such an ideal. The nature of the landscape also plays a role. The middle distance, the same levels as the sitter's chest, is in warm colors. Men live in this space. There is winding roads and a bridge. The space represents the transition between the space of the sitter and the far distance. There is a landscape where the landscape becomes a wild and uninhabited space of rocks and water which stretches to the horizon, which Leonardo has cleverly drawn on the levels of the sitter's eye. Pablo Picasso's dominated the development of visual arts during the first half of the 20th century, along with Georges Baroque. Picasso is best known for one of the creators of Cubism, though he utilized many styles during his career. In the painting of his blue period, such as The Old Guitarist, Picasso worked in a monochromatic palette, flattened forms, and tragic, sorrowful themes. The tragic themes and expressive style of Picasso's blue period began after a close friend committed suicide in Paris. During this time, the artist was sympathetic to the plight of the downtrodden and painted many canvases depicting the miseries of the poor, the ill, and those cast out of society. He knew what it was like to be impoverished, having been nearly penniless during all of 1902. This bent and slightless man holds close to him a large round guitar. Its brown body represents the painting's only shift in color. Both physically and symbolically, the instrument fills the space around the solitary figure who seems oblivious to the blindness and poverty as he plays. At the time the painting was made, literature of the symbolist movement included blind characters who possessed powers of inner vision. The thin, skeleton-like figure of the blind musician was also roots in Picasso's native country, Spain. The old man's elongated limbs and cramped, angular posture recall the figures of the great 16th century artist El Greco.